Governor Huckabee, I think it's worth pointing out the irony that you're sitting there in New York where I used to live, and I'm here in Washington where maybe you will live in just over a year?
We'll see about that, SC. I did say in my book that there's really only one address in all of Washington that I would have any interest in moving to, and I think you probably know which one that might be.
I do, and we'll talk about 2016 in a bit, but let's start with your book. It's God, Guns, Grits, and Gravy. Explain the title, first of all.
Well, first of all, it is not a recipe book of Southern cuisine, so I want to put everybody to ease that if you're saying, well, gee, I don't even know what a grit is, relax. Here's the point of the book. There are three major cultural bubbles in America. New York, Washington, we're in two of those, and the other one is Hollywood. And from those three cultural bubbles emanate fashion, finance, government, politics, music, entertainment, movies, television, pretty much all the things that set the American cultural table. But my point of the book is that there's a big disconnect between the people, the values, the attitudes, the lifestyles of people living in those three bubbles and the people who live out in what we often call the flyover country. All of that red area between the east and west coast that if you look at an electoral map, apart from a few urban centers, is vastly red. And in that great divide, that flyover country, exists what I call the land of God, guns, grits, and gravy. And it's just a descriptive term of flyover country. And so the book really does two things. It says to all those folks out there in the land of God, guns, grits, and gravy, you're not alone. There are a lot of folks like you, and you're okay. You're not nuts. And it says to the people who are living in the bubbles, hey, here's who we are. You don't really know us. You don't know what drives us, what makes us think, and what's important to us, or why it's important to us. So read the book. Maybe you'll find out these good old boys aren't so dumb after all.
Yeah, you described the divide between the Bubblevilles, those urban centers that you described, and the Bubbavilles in those flyover states. But surely you don't think that everyone in the bubble is bad, and not every Bubba is good, right? So what point are you trying to make in describing the country in this way?
Well, clearly it's a generalization. I mean, you can go to Midtown Manhattan and you're going to find people who really are bubbas in the way they think, the way they feel. And you're going to go to places, you know, like Birmingham, Alabama, and you're going to find some ultra-liberals, believe it or not. So it's not that you can define any geographic area. But I think it is generally true that the culture and lifestyles that you're going to see in the bubbles are very different than out here in Bubbaville. And the reason that it became very stark to me was over the past 6.5 years when I was traveling to New York every weekend to do my show for Fox, I really came to realize, boy, when I get off that plane and I'm in New York for 2 or 3 days a week, I'm in a different world than the world I live in when I get back to Bubbaville. Because people would always say, oh, have you moved to New York? And here's what I would always say, Essie. I said, I'm not moving to New York unless they let me duck hunt in Central Park. Now, that would shock the people in New York. They can't imagine somebody out there with a 12-gauge Benelli semi-automatic blowing ducks away at Jackie Onassis Pond in Central Park. That would get me in the headlines for sure. But my point is to describe this completely different worldview. And so often when I would come to New York, I would say, I think I didn't just go to New York. I've landed on a different planet. And it's just because there is a vast disconnect, and that's the word that comes to me, to explain why it is that these voting patterns and lifestyle patterns, cultural patterns, if you will, are so disparate between the two areas.
Well, believe me, if they allowed duck hunting in Central Park, I'd leave the state of Virginia, and I'd be right back there with you. But talk about why this cultural divide is such a problem. Is it just that two sides don't understand each other, or is there a real threat to the country coming from this cultural divide and this disconnect, as you explain it?
I wouldn't say that there's a threat to the existence of this great republic because of a cultural difference, but I do think that the polarization is not necessarily healthy to building the strong kind of America where we are a melting pot. We are increasingly less the melting pot and we are more several simmering pots on the same stove, but each maintaining its own unique recipe. I think it's healthy to have differences of culture. For example, the Southern culture, the one I'm most familiar with and most comfortable with, I don't want to lose that. I don't want us to become so homogenized that we morph into something that's unrecognizable. But there needs to be a respect, a mutual respect, an understanding, not a melting, but an understanding. And that's what I fear we don't have, because I've found that many people look toward those of us in Bubbaville with contempt. Mm-hmm. They look toward us with a sense of bewilderment and wonderment. What do you mean you believe in God? You know, what do you mean you think that you ought to go to church and that paying a dime out of every dollar of your income and a tithe to the church makes sense? That's crazy. Or why would anyone own a firearm? I've had discussions even with conservative people in New York who, if you tell them that you own firearms, they're just aghast. It's almost like they want to jump under the table because they fear that you're going to, whip out a pistol and start shooting any minute. And you just want to say, you just don't really know us, do you?
Yeah.
Now, let me make this observation. Essie, I think most of the people who live in Bubbaville kind of do understand the people in the bubbles, and here's why. Because everything that we see on television and the movies is all about the bubbles. I mean, television sitcoms, movies are mostly depicted, whether they're crime shows, doctor shows, or films, most of them are about people who live in the bubbles. New York, Washington, the political thrillers, our California lifestyle. So we kind of know what the people live like because we see it all the time. But how many times can you think of a television sitcom that treats religious people respectfully, that treats us as if we really are pretty normal and balanced and engaging people? We're usually presented either as charlatans who are out to hustle people out of their money, or people who are mouth-breathing, knuckle-dragging Neanderthals who are just so backward that we haven't modernized, and we're highly uneducated, incredibly anti-intellectual, and therefore really just not up to the same level as the elite. That's what I'm speaking to.
Yeah. Well, and this is what I love about our long friendship. I'm a non-believer. You're a Baptist minister,
Yes.
and yet we both have a really deep respect for the Judeo-Christian values that this country was forged on, and for the American faithful. And you call people who put faith and family first the new American outcasts. And I think that's what you're getting at, that Hollywood in particular depicts people of faith and people who put family first as sort of backwards, as rubes. But you would have to admit, I don't have to tell you this, Fox News does really well. They have a lot of viewers over at Fox News. Conservative radio, conservative online media does really well. And whether Hollywood wants to admit it or not, conservative movies do well. So aren't conservative values pretty well represented?
Well, they're certainly represented within the niche of the media that is targeted toward them. And this is what I think baffles some of the folks in the elite. They look down upon Fox News and Fox News viewers, and how could that network be doing so well? I'll tell you why it's doing so well, because it is scratching where the itch is. And sometimes, whether it's Roma Downey and Mark Burnett's magnificent drama of the Bible that got more viewers than anything that had ever been on cable, whether it's the extraordinary response to reality shows that are wholesome, like Duck Dynasty or 19 and Counting with my good friends, the Duggars, who I know very well from Arkansas. That's a head scratcher to a lot of people who live in the bubbles. They just can't imagine who are the people who watch this stuff. But it's also true even of films. I remember when the movie The Blind Side came out. It was a film that those of us who lived out there in Bubbaville, we watched that and we said, yeah, we get that. We relate to it. We understand the language, the whole love of football. We get it all. There were a lot of people in Hollywood who just couldn't figure out how that movie ever was such a huge success. It was a sleeper for them. It was an obvious choice for us. Look at films recently like Heaven is for Real or God's Not Dead, the Kevin Sorbo movie. Those are films that certainly played to a niche. We understand it.